Now this is what we call a house record. The house music, like all music, was inspired by another style of music. And we call it...
Hi everyone, my name is Cristina Lazic. I'm a DJ and producer from Milan, and I'm very happy to be here with Magma today to talk about it was the history of electronic music. So the track that we just listened to is called A History, and in 6 minutes it summarizes how house music was born. So today I'm here to launch a series of episodes where we're going to be exploring together the history of music, and this format is called Roots. Roots because we're really exploring the origins and where the music that makes us dance so much comes from. So yes, here we go, let's start. So, today we're exploring how black music is influential in really generating what has become house music and techno music. There is a lot of importance to the topic of racial equality, which has emerged just a few weeks ago with the Black Lives Matter movement. So we've been seeing a lot of people all over the world, especially in the US, but also in Europe and really everywhere, that are demonstrating for racial equality. And together with that, we have assisted to a social movement on social media as well. We have seen on the 2nd of June, the Blackout Tuesday, where a lot of people just posted black pictures in a sign of respect for the black community and towards racial equality. And also was followed this by another post by many people in the industry that were talking about the fact that we should remember the fact that a lot of musical genres come from black people. So for example, the genres that we take for granted, like jazz music, R&B, hip-hop, yes, they come from black music, but also genres that we wouldn't know so sure about. For example, rock and roll, or also house music and techno music, they indeed come from the black community. So yeah, so let's start by exploring house music. So today I'm gonna show you how house music started in Chicago. In Chicago, at the end of the 70s, there was a club. There was a club called The Warehouse. In The Warehouse, there were like really few people attending the parties where there was a DJ resident called Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles, that is also known as really the father of house music. And why am I saying that there were just a few minorities attending The Warehouse? Because you had mainly black people, but also gay people. And in The Warehouse, Frankie Knuckles was really experimenting a new way of playing music. He was mixing music from synthesized music, coming from European kind of influence, but also disco classics. He was mixing them with the rock and roll tracks every now and then, and he was really playing an eclectic type of way of mixing that was making the crowd go crazy. He was making the crowd go crazy so much, and people were loving his way of playing so much, that Frankie Knuckles really gave born to what is known now as house music. And where does the name house come from? Guess what? It really comes from The Warehouse, the club where Frankie Knuckles was playing. And at this time also there was the beginning of a really new genre of music called house music, where we had seen a lot of DJs from Chicago experimenting new ways of playing and also of producing. So let's listen to now one track by Frankie Knuckles, which is also known as the first house track, called Your Love. all house music lovers will recognize this track. It's really one of the first ones and maybe the most important track of house music. At the time we were talking about the end of the 70s, early 80s, and house music became so mainstream and so important that Frankie Knuckles ended up really touring all over the world and also remixing music by really even pop artists or like very, very big names. For example, Diana Ross or Michael Bolton. And he actually was also awarded a Grammy Award for Best Remixer of the Year in 1997. So yes, the Chicago house is also characterized by other black DJs and producers that really paved the way to what has become house music right now. Another example is Ron Hardy. Ron Hardy was less obsessed about the quality of the music he was mixing. That was typical of Frankie Knuckles. Ron Hardy was more experimenting with a way of playing called the reel-to-reel, and he was also very famous for experimenting things so much that he was like putting the pitch up, so increasing the speed of music up to really, really, really high levels, which was a bit weird, but which people started to love. Also, he started experimenting, playing different type of music. For example, acid house. It's a genre that started at this time. And he started playing this music that at the beginning made the people leave the club, and eventually people started loving it. So that's also how house music started taking different trends all over the world. And going more towards the history and coming all the way to our days, let's explore how house music has evolved. So first of all, we move from Chicago to Europe. We moved to Chicago from Europe, and we see that there are more and more producers that are starting to really take the house music and revisit it somehow. So for example, we have the Eurodance current that starts, and we have, for example, Snap, a duo made by an Italian and a German that come together and they make the very famous song, The Power, like I've Got the Power. Most of you will know it for sure. And guess what? These two guys, they had met when they were part of a group called Off, and they had met in 1885. Now we're talking about the 90s, and the third person that was part of this group, Off, was Papa Sven Väth, which I'm sure most of you know. Anyway, so the Snap are typical of another current called Eurodance. So Eurodance is characterized really by a mix of synthesized sounds. And as I said earlier, synthesized sounds are typical from Europe, really, and also lyrics, just thrown in there with no meaning. So that's really typical of this style of music. And then all the way again, we are going throughout the years. We started with the 70s and 80s Chicago house, moving to 90s and early 2000s. Now we are exploring the genre of producers that may resonate even more with us. For example, Daft Punk. So Daft Punk are very famous for taking samples, mainly coming from black people, and using them in their production. So, for example, we have their very, very famous and multi-awarded album, Discovery, that, guess what? It includes seven samples coming from black music. And now we're going to listen to one track called Da Funk from Daft Punk. this track. By the way, do you know where the term track comes from? So why did we suddenly start calling electronic music made of tracks and not songs? That again happened with the Chicago House. So what happened is that the producers of the Chicago House, which, as I said earlier, is really the current kicked off by Frankie Knuckles and all of these black DJs and producers in Chicago, they were basically producing in a different way from normal. They were taking the sounds from the drum machine. So typical sounds of electronic music would be like kick, hat, claps, all of these sounds. And most of the sounds were coming from drum machine. And for this reason, you really had a different way of composing music, which made these songs be renamed tracks. So now again, we take it for granted, but the fact that we call tracks is also thanks to the influence of black people. So you can hear how Daft Punk were really playing with the samples, and they were also putting like some synthesized sounds into their production. They were masters of doing that. Duo was then soon followed by a lot of other producers, mainly European based, that really continued the evolution of house music. Let's think, for example, about Mojo. Mojo from France, they were again experimenting using samples, and for example, a very famous track by them is Lady Hear Me Tonight. Or let's think about other producers like the ones of Salsoul Nugget, if you wanna, more British style, however still bringing really the influence coming from house music and the Chicago House. So yes, all the way until now, let's talk about even more music that resonates with what we hear nowadays on the radio, on what makes us dance nowadays. So let's think about the duo A-Track. A-Track, they became super famous with a hit that was very popular not a long time ago, I would say not more than 10 years ago, called Barbra Streisand. Barbra Streisand is the remix of a song from the 70s, a disco classic, by a black band called Boney M. And they remixed it and they became a hit called Barbra Streisand. Going more to, again, the days where we live right now, we can also talk about other producers that became super famous also by using samples coming from the black community. One example is Avicii. Avicii, that is acknowledged as a very good producer, is more into the EDM side, clearly. However, he also used samples from the black community. He used the sample of I Got a Good Feeling by Etta James for his track Levels, that again became a worldwide hit just, some time ago. And if we continue to explore really the evolution of house music and how the Chicago House has really paved the way to what we hear now, we can see that now what we are living is really kind of a revival, a way to re-explore again disco classics. So let's think about Purple Disco Machine. Purple Disco Machine has become very successful thanks to the remixes that he is making of all these disco classics. So for example, he made a track that is called Body Work from a track called Body Funk by, again, Hot Strike, which were a group, a band from black origins. And he's still bringing people to, gather in clubs and go crazy and dance a lot, thanks to the use of samples, most of which come from the black community again. Now we're also seeing a further evolution of all of that, where we also see a lot of DJs that take hip-hop samples or R&B samples and they put them into their tracks. So yes, we can see that really all the genres that were kicked off by the black community are being revisited more and more also into electronic music. So now I want to talk about another topic, that is techno. So, where do you think techno comes from? So I am sure that most of you think that techno may come from Berlin. Berlin is definitely a big city for techno, is the European capital of techno, but guess what? Techno comes from another American city, Detroit. So again, let's go back, let's the flashback to the 70s and 80s. Okay, so we are in Detroit. We have a city that is a post-industrial city. It's a city where people were really looking for escapism, and where there was the local mayor and the governmental rules were pretty liberal when it came to music, clubbing, and all of that. And in this context, in the suburbs of Detroit, we have a trio, a group of three guys called the Belleville Tree, again, black DJs and producers, that come together. They come together, and what they do is that they're exploring new ways of producing. They are listening to the radio in the night. They are hearing all the amazing Chicago house music from Frankie Knuckles and his peers, and they decide to experiment with this music. They experiment with this music, and they apply the typical sounds of the automotive and the industrial environment typical of Detroit to their music. So they start taking influence from the European producers, namely Kraftwerk as an example, or Giorgio Moroder. So these guys in Europe, they were experimenting a lot with synths. They take these sounds, they take the house music from Chicago, they start re-experimenting and producing new music. And they start what is now known as techno. Why is it called techno? So, first of all, because it's characterized by more technical sounds. It has a higher speed than house music. It is more, it's colder, it's harder. And again, it comes from those typical sounds of the automotive. It's more technical. So, Frankie Knuckles hears these sounds and he says, that sounds so techno, right? So, let's now listen to a classic from this period called Strings of Life. Of Life is a track that was produced by Derek May. Derek May was one of the three Belleville Tree. And everyone, again, all the music lovers will recognize this track is a classic. And as I said earlier, techno music really came from various influences. The first influence that I want to talk to you about are Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk are a group from Germany, from Düsseldorf. They are known as the precursors of electronic music in general. They were experimenting a lot with synths, and they were very ahead in their way of thinking. And they definitely allowed people like Frankie Knuckles and people like the Belleville Tree and Eric May to generate the amazingness of house music and techno music. So yes, Kraftwerk also, they said themselves that they wanted to reach a sort of a synergy between the typical harmony and melody coming from European influence together with the feelings that you were getting from the Afro-American vibe and the African influence music. So if you make these two together, if you put them together, the harmony and melody from Europe and the feelings arising from the black community, then you can get magic, right? So that's what Kraftwerk were believing. Now, let's listen to one track by Kraftwerk. It's called Computer World. But I love this sound. It's amazing how these guys were really able to think ahead, and yes, they were one of the precursors of electronic music indeed. Let's listen to them a bit more because I love this track.
Money. People. Computer world.
That is a precursor of electronic music and that highly influenced techno is Giorgio Moroder. Giorgio Moroder, again, he was super ahead in his way of thinking. He was experimenting again a lot with synthesizers, and he became a super successful producer. He discovered also some amazing singers and artists. So, for example, Donna Summer became famous thanks to the production by Giorgio Moroder. So yes, we can say that really that techno came from this influence also on its own. It came from the synthesizers and these machinery sounds from Europe. It came from these precursors of electronic music in general. It came from Europe. It came from the Afro-American vibes, and I would say that the magic was really created by having the marriage really of these two sources. So yeah, that's how techno became the genre that it is. And now, of course, it's still a huge genre. It still gathers a lot of people, and you have a lot of amazing techno DJs. I can give you a few names. For example, we have Jeff Mills, we have Carl Cox, we have Richie Otwin. Richie Otwin is a great DJ, and actually, let's listen to one track by Richie Otwin to explore the way in which techno has evolved all the way until today. as I said earlier, when you think about techno, actually most people think of Berlin. So, well, curiously enough, Detroit was the place where techno music started. It became more, worldwide type of music, thanks also to a compilation that was released by Virgin Music Records in the UK in 1987. That was called actually Techno, the new dance sound from Detroit. And it has become what it is now. And Berlin is still a big city for techno music, for techno DJs, techno producers, and it's also the place where there are some very famous and important clubs. For example, the Berghain is a very famous club based in Berlin, also known as the kind of techno temple. Let's listen to a bit more of Richie Otwin. Okay, so yes, we've been exploring really house music and the way in which the house music has evolved on its own, and also different types of music that have been generated from all of these trends also in Europe and in other countries from the US. We've explored also techno music and how it has evolved throughout the time. Now I just want to talk about a couple more things that should make us really reflect about the amazing contribution of the Black community to the music and music industry and electronic music in particular. So, for example, Deep House. Deep House was again a genre that was started by a Black DJ and producer called Larry Heard. Larry Heard, he was able to combine actually the music typical from soul into the electro sounds, and that's what generated really Deep House. So now I want to make you listen to Larry Heard with Can You Feel It? Broadcasting from Milan, but this music makes me project myself into some kind of island with a cocktail in my hand, and it makes me dream of a sunset on the beach. They're talking about how house music was born. That I want to talk to you about is the whole way in which we conceive the idea of going clubbing. So now when you say I go clubbing, you think about a place where you go and you dance, right? So this, again, the whole conception of clubbing as we mean it now, that of going to a venue for dancing, comes from black music and black people. So in New York there was a club called Paradise Garage, where there was a resident DJ called Larry Levan that is also known as one of the founders of dub, which is again a different type of music where there was also an inclusion of reggae music. And in this club, people actually, this was the first club where people were going to dance and not just going there to have a drink and chat. And this club was an iconic club of New York, where we were also having like some special guests attending, for example, Donna Summer or even a very, very young Madonna. So once again, clubbing also, the way in which we conceive it nowadays, this whole thing has been given thanks to the influence of the amazing vibes and feelings that black music and black people have been bringing and their contribution. So, today we've been exploring really how house music started and the history and the amazing Frankie Knuckles and how he kicked off this genre. Then we have been exploring techno music, deep house, clubbing. So it's been really, really a pleasure to take you through this journey. I would like to thank Magma, and I wait for you for the next episode of Roots. Ciao!
And we call it disco. But disco is more than just music. It is a feeling. It is a movement. Disco is a way of life. Over the next 6 minutes, we're gonna take you on a quick tour to the history of disco. Let's start with Nicky Siano from the Gallery in New York City. He took DJing one step further and would beat match and use 3 turntables to play records like this. And records like this. Then there was Larry Levan of the most famous club in disco history, the Paradise Garage. There was David Mancuso, who had a private club in his own apartment. He called it The Loft. He played all kinds of records